What is podcasting? Hi everyone, Leo Notenboom here for askleo.com. Hey, if you haven't subscribed to my Confident Computing weekly newsletter, do so now, newsletter.askleo.com to sign up today. Every week I send out tips and tricks and interesting stuff to help you use technology with greater confidence. So podcasting has been around now for a couple of decades, and it's actually experiencing a very interesting resurgence right now. But what the heck is it? If you're not using podcasting, if you're not listening to any podcasts right now, you may not really understand exactly what it is and, in a sense, what you're missing. Podcasting is nothing more than a structured delivery of audio files. What does that mean? Well, here's what it means step by step. An online publisher, say like me, creates an audio file, usually an MP3 file, that is a recording of some content. I'll talk about which content I produce here in a moment, but you'll get the idea very quickly. That MP3 file then is referenced in a file format that is referred to as RSS, for Rich Site Syndication, I think. That file format is then submitted to various podcast directories or simply made available on someone's website. Podcasting tools that you can listen to podcasts on, then understand the format of that file. They periodically fetch the most recent copy of that file, and they then make available to you in some reasonable user interface the latest episode of whatever those publishers that you have subscribed to have published. The term podcast is actually, I'm sure there's an appropriate word for how words are mashed together like this, but it's a combination of the word iPod, which is where podcasts originally became most popular, and broadcast. It's a way to broadcast audio on iPods, or now almost all sorts of mobile devices, phones, desktops, whatever. But the bottom line is it's a way to broadcast audio in a structured form. So there are lots of good podcasting apps these days. I happen to use Pocket Casts myself. It runs on the desktop, it runs on my phone, it runs on my tablet. The neat thing I like about it is that regardless of where I've been listening to a particular podcast, it is kept in sync across all my devices. So if I'm listening to something in the car on the way home, I can then switch to my desktop and pick up where I left off. Spotify is another big one right now. They've made a huge play into publishing podcasts to make them available to their Spotify audience to listen to. There's Apple Podcasts, which is basically, it has its roots back in iTunes when podcasting was originally developed. But the bottom line is it too is another application specifically for listening to podcasts on your Apple devices. Google has one. There's dozens of podcast apps for you to consume podcasts. Now, podcast creation, like I said, it's really nothing more than generating an MP3 file. I've been doing it for years. I've been doing it in a couple of different ways. Originally, what I would do is I would sit down, again, with this microphone, and simply record myself reading each article, and then publishing that as an MP3 file in a podcast feed. You could then subscribe to it, and rather than reading my articles, you could listen to them. A few years ago, I changed that technique. I started recording videos. And now the audio podcast feed from Askleo is really just the audio from these videos. So if you subscribe to that, occasionally you may hear me talk about something on screen, but other than that, you'll hear me talk rather than having to watch something using YouTube or whatever technique you're using to watch this video. Also, for a few years now, I've been one of the co-hosts of the TEH Podcast, which is a traditional podcast you can subscribe to. It is once a week, roughly. Gary and I sit down and talk about things interesting in technology. That's a very traditional approach to podcasting, where you have two or more hosts or guests talking about something for some amount of time, and then they do so periodically. There are generally two styles of podcast. The most popular one are the ongoing series. Like I said, I've been doing the TEH podcast for a few years right now. There's really no end in sight. We'll simply talk about technology every week or so until we get tired of doing it. The other style is what I would call a limited series. I have seen this a little bit more lately, where you'll have a fixed number of podcast episodes that discuss a particular topic. The moral equivalent of, say, reading a book. Each week or each episode might be a chapter until the book is done and then the podcast is over. There are a number of different topics. I don't mean to imply that this is done for books. It's a very interesting approach to, again, being able to provide interesting information in audio form in a way that is easily accessible to a lot of folks. Now, when I first started talking about podcasts many years ago, I had at least one person who was unconvinced that it would ever take off because he happened to listen to a couple of podcasts that he felt was boring. Podcasting is just some technology to deliver you content. It doesn't make the content any better. It doesn't make it any worse. It's just content. If the quality of what's being delivered is poor, if the quality of what's being delivered is boring, then absolutely, people aren't going to subscribe. They're not going to listen. They've got better things to do with their time. On the other hand, there are some incredibly popular podcasts, the moral equivalent of old-time radio shows, if you will, where somebody or some group is putting together some truly interesting and engaging information and delivering it as audio. That is one of the reasons podcasting, I think, has really taken off of late. It's very simple to do. Anybody with a microphone can do it. It really does boil down to generating quality content that people are actually interested in listening to. Hopefully I fall into that category. For comments, for updates, for links related to this topic and more, visit askleo.com/2205. I'm Leo Notenboom, and this is askleo.com. Thanks for watching.